Good morning and welcome to the next in our series of masterclasses. My name's Irene Buteman and I lead the Planning for Place programme in the Improvement Service and also led the Shaping Places programme as well. We're here today, as it shows you on the title there, to look at the masterclass series that we've been running and to actually look at case studies, examples of place-based approaches. In particular today, looking at examples that have stemmed from the Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme. There's a number of masterclasses that precede this one, and they are all on the Improvement Service website, and they explain and give the context for taking a place-based approach and in particular taking the Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme approach. Today, our housekeeping is we've got quite a number of people on the call, so we are asking that folks keep their themselves muted so that we're not interrupting, and questions will be done with the Q&A option. Any technical issues at all, please pop that in the chat. If you put a question in the chat, we won't be seeing it, so please do use that Q&A for that. We'll also use the chat for popping up any links to what we're referring to in the course of the webinar. So I just want to give a little bit of background and context to what we're covering today. As I said, this is part of a masterclass series. There are 4 masterclasses already that run through what is a place-based approach and go into the kind of the detail of that. So what we'll do today is I'll give a little bit of that context just as a reminder of what's sitting here already. But then we'll be spending the bulk of the time looking at the examples that those of you that attended the previous masterclasses were asking for. So we'll be looking at what happened as a result of work that we did with one of our Shaping Places for Wellbeing project towns of Fraserburgh and how that has spread into Aberdeenshire. And then we'll also be looking at work that has spread from our project town of Rutherglen to look at child poverty work in the Carlton ward in Glasgow. A quick bit of context from me before I pass on to those examples is that the previous masterclasses go into the explanation of what are the key parts to any place-based approach. And it's helpful to have that context as we hear from examples today as well, that is very much about knowing what people are experiencing, the data, the qualitative, the community insight, and then knowing what are the features in a place that have a positive impact on people's health and well-being, and bringing both of those into decision making. For Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme, that involved looking at data, inequality data, quantitative and qualitative use of tools such as the place standard. And for ourselves, we were embedded in the place and wellbeing outcomes because they give those evidence features that every place needs for those that are using that place to thrive. And we also used processes called place and wellbeing assessments, briefing papers and so on in order to bring both of those bits of information into our decisions, our policies and our strategies. So that's the main areas of these preceding masterclasses to this one today. So Angela Keith is the area manager at Banff and Buchan within Aberdeenshire Council, and we've worked closely with Angela on the Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme in the Fraserburgh area, but I'm not going to steal any of that limelight. I shall pass straight over to Angela for you to tell everybody and give us that little bit of context and to introduce your colleagues. Thanks, Angela.
So yes, thank you, Irene, and it's been a pleasure working with the Improvement Service on this approach over the last 18, probably 24 months now that we've been around this work. As part of that, Laura Stewart came on board as part of that programme in Fraserburgh to be our project lead, and later down the line, we invited Matthew Smart to be our link lead with that connection to the community, which was absolutely vital to ensure that rounded picture of what Fraserburgh's needs were. So today we're just going to really invite you through the process that we followed from an Aberdeenshire Council perspective, from project to strategic embedment of the programme and that place-based approach within Aberdeenshire Council, and an extension into our community planning partners as well. So I think Laura's just going to set the scene very quickly around the Fraserburgh work, then I'll bring you into the Aberdeenshire work.
Thanks, Angela. So just a quick recap. I think some of you have heard me speak about the Fraserburgh project before, so I won't go into too much detail, but just to outline that Fraserburgh was one of the 7 project towns across Scotland that was identified for the Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme, but it was slightly different because Matthew and myself were embedded in Aberdeenshire Council, which obviously gave us great access into Angela's team and resources and knowledge and expertise, as well as linking with the other project towns and colleagues in the improvement service that were also delivering this. So I always say that Matthew and I got a double win on that one, best of both worlds. So in Fraserburgh, we underwent the same journey as the other project towns. So quantitative and qualitative reports were developed initially to outline what we were looking at in Fraserburgh in terms of our place and wellbeing outcomes, the challenges and inequalities that were facing the communities in the area. And that helped to inform what the steering group looked at in terms of our current ambitions and what we wanted to do for the period of time that we were embedded in Fraserburgh. So our steering group had great representation from our local community planning partners, who contributed actively to guiding the work that was undertaken in Fraserburgh. We completed 4 place and wellbeing assessments specifically in Fraserburgh under this piece of work, plus we carried out an additional assessment for our colleagues in the Learning Estates team over in Clatt, and then Matthew's picked that work up, so I won't steal his thunder, he'll tell you more about that later. We also produced the place and wellbeing outcome briefings for a number of the place and wellbeing outcomes for Fraserburgh, so that these could be used by colleagues to help inform decisions and discussions that were impacting on Fraserburgh. And then Matthew led an innovative approach in Fraserburgh that hadn't been done in any of the other project towns, and that was around setting up a community champions group. So in Fraserburgh, we invited members of the community that already had a leadership role, whether that was professionally or voluntarily within Fraserburgh community, to join our champions group so that they could collectively discuss the work that was ongoing, the assessments that were being undertaken, and contribute into that process as a group, and also to bring those groups together to share learning, knowledge, expertise across the participants. And that was a huge success. Matthew led that with the community, and that group is continuing despite the fact that the rest of the work wrapped up in Fraserburgh formally. The group still exists and is ongoing. We shared our learning both internally and externally. So being placed within Aberdeenshire Council, we were welcomed across a number of services teams within the organisation to share the learning of the Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme. And we were also invited to our local community planning partners to share learning from the programme as well with them. So that was brilliant. And then the final part from the work from Fraserburgh is it helped to inform the development of the place strategy for Aberdeenshire Council at a corporate level. Which was brilliant. So we contributed in discussing and identifying the place and wellbeing outcomes as a key framework, and contributing to the other input from services and teams into developing that strategy. And I will pass over to Angela to give you a lot more detail around that process and where that led us to.
Okay, thank you. Got the slides now, we can see them in full detail, so that's really helpful. So yeah, that work that Laura has just described was fundamental in us moving forward to consider how we could embed place and wellbeing, place and the place-based working as an approach within the council. And the first step of that was to get full council to decide to embed that fully, which they did. The priority has since evolved to be referred to as our Living Well Locally approach, and the place policy and the place strategy set out the council's position as to how we will deliver place across Aberdeenshire, which ultimately will result in 17 place plans that will be delivered over the next 3 years. So our policy and strategy was formally approved in June last year and then further endorsed by our community planning partners later that year. This was particularly important to achieve a partnership approach, both at a strategic and an operational level, to ensure that there was strong collaboration and working alongside our communities to achieve those shared visions and objectives across our places. And of course, from Aberdeenshire Council's perspective, we also set course last year on a transformation journey, and the strategy underpins that programme of work as well. Next slide, please, Laura. Okay, so in relation to the place policy, hopefully from previous master plans, you'll all be very familiar with the Shaping Places for Wellbeing framework. And from my perspective, there has huge benefits of bringing stakeholders, various policies and data together to understand local needs and the impacts of service delivery, both positive and negative, and making sure that there's ways in which we can collectively approach this. So the approach absolutely underpins and offers a clear and consistent language, leading to transparent decision making, and provides a solid foundation to shape services that meet the needs of individual places. Next slide, please, Laura. Okay, so as part of that policy and strategy approach, we set course on understanding what the governance structure required to be. And this presents just an image of our skeleton governance structure, and this is going to be presented to our community planning board this month, in fact. So this absolutely, alongside the endorsement of the policy and the strategy, the structure obviously was a key element for us to consider, both strategically and operationally. So huge positive step forward to get this in front of the community planning board in June, and the structure aims to support both the partnership approach at a local level, where we'll develop our place-based networks that will collectively develop and deliver the place plans, and of course understand how the projects can be delivered and funded. The overarching structure will consist of 6 areas aligned to the political boundaries of the council, and then they'll be further broken down into the place plan areas, with an opportunity to invite council services partners and communities into one space, responding to the priorities identified within each of the plans. So once we have that endorsement, and there is a report also going to full council in June, so the timing is very good, that we'll have the endorsement of the governance structure and indeed an update to full council setting out the timing of the delivery of the plans, and that's also later this month. So it'll be an opportunity for you to familiarise yourself with that reporting structures online through our committee management structures if you want more information in that. Okay, if we move on to Place Toolkit, please, Laura. Okay, thank you. So our next approach was to focus on 6 key elements of what we consider to be required to create a strong foundation of consistency, efficiency, and ultimately be able to produce a robust product that represents the needs of each place. So each work stream is led by an area manager who also leads their place plans in each of their areas. So there was good synergies there. Ultimately, I'll go through each of these 6 work streams, but ultimately what will happen is the area managers will pull all this information together, and that will present a packet of information that will be used across all our place-based networks to create a consistent and clear way to approach place planning as a whole. And I'll move on to just describe some of the activities that are taking place as part of each of the work streams. So firstly, in terms of governance, The community planning and council governance structure that has been reviewed to support the implementation of a place focus, and we've had a huge amount of consultation that has straddled across the whole community planning landscape, and indeed our council structures. And as I said, this is going to be the foundation of what we'll present to the board later this month. The revised structure provides improved government that makes sure that there is solid links at that strategic and operational level. And as I said earlier, that focus is based on the 6 areas. We already have local community planning groups that give us a really solid understanding of local priorities, but we'll expand that to be place-based networks that will enhance the remits of these groups. And it will invite not just community planning partners into that space, but also council services and also key stakeholders across each of our communities, businesses, community groups, etc. So it'll present a very rounded opportunity for people to come and accurately tell us what the priorities are, and then out of that will be a solid partnership approach to delivery of place. If we move on. So the next work stream was focusing on funding and resources. And I think it's fair to say, and I'm sure it won't surprise anybody in the call, to say that funding is a particular challenge, recognising the fiscal challenges that partners and councils face now and into the foreseeable future. But nevertheless, the council has allocated small pots of money, recognising the priority of place-based working, and is supportive of the community activity in particular around the delivery of local place plans falling out of the MPF4 planning arrangements, and also the place principles that are embedded around the delivery of CAPs. So a place reserve at a more strategic level does exist within the council. However, we've been very prudent in not spending any of that until we actually understand what the place priorities are. And then we'll have to really carefully consider how that money is spent and where, to make sure that it has a key focus on delivering the priorities across each place. And that will be a challenge, 17 place plans over a 3-year period, probably all identifying key areas of work that they would like to deliver. So there'll need to be a mechanism within that governance structure that allows clarity as to how the funding and the resources will be best placed. Okay, if we can move on to training and culture. So this is the work stream that I'm leading on, and part of that work is a key focus on how place is integral to the council's transformation agenda, because we see the place principle strategically presenting an opportunity and a mechanism to implement the transformation of services delivered by the council and partners to the integration of, as I say, into the integration of our services and our partners. And that will aim to build initially a strong place-based culture, and then ultimately embed the Shaping Places for Wellbeing framework throughout the organisation and across those local partner structures, to ensure that the priority piece of work is about understanding fully what we mean by a place-based approach, and then so that there will be training opportunities that we will establish across the council, first of all, identifying who our key stakeholders are and building bespoke training over the next couple of months. And we'll extend that into our partner organisations, and we'll absolutely be utilising the Masterclass training that's already been developed. So we're not starting from zero on this one, but we'll be building up to create that bespoke focus. The next one, please. So community engagement, an obvious one, and Matthew, I'll give you a bit more detailed insight as to how we've approached that within Aberdeenshire. But officers within this group have now developed and refined an engagement guide that builds on good practice standards of engagement, as well as learned experience from engaging on existing place plan approaches and building on the place work that's been done in Fraserburgh. It's anticipated that the guide will be updated as place plans progress. There'll be huge amounts of learning as we really start to develop and deliver our place plans, and that progress and changing will include samples of specific engagement plans. So it's an early stage, but obviously as part of the community planning landscape, the place principle that Irene mentioned earlier is a really solid tool and a huge opportunity for us to expand our learning and community engagement around. Next one, please. So data and performance, obviously that qualitative information, standard information is hugely important to understand as we develop our place plans. So the council is committed to a data hub project, which is integral to the enabling of data informed approaches to developing our place plans across the 17 areas. And the data hub project has agreed to develop data packs as the first phase of the project, and it's anticipated that the first release of our data packs will be later this year around September. And we plan to include in those packs identification and agreement of the data-led geographies, and there's been some debate about that because the academy cluster boundaries is what we have formulated our 17 place plans on, but there's not always straight lines around those boundaries, so we've had to consider where the intermediate zones and where that data boundaries sit. Also, there has been agreement on 29 indicators that will be part of the place data packs, and we're looking to include 10 of them as part of the first rollout. And they'll include contextual data, including demographics, boundaries, populations, mapping, etc. And there'll also be indicators that have been mapped to the 13 shaping places for wellbeing outcome themes as well. So later this year, we hope to have our first solid data pack that will then inform the delivery of the 17 place plans. But again, there'll be an opportunity to reshape that, use the learning and adapt as we go. So finally, the final group of the 6 is our toolkit group. And that group, I suppose, was the first starting point, and we recognised there was so much more work to be done, as really the toolkit element, I suppose, is the end point, and it's how we'll actually demonstrate and present our place plans to the communities. So we're planning on using StoryMap, which will, alongside that interactive formula of being able to interactively click on the story map arrangements, select any of the place plans, and also there's an opportunity for us to highlight as part of that the data and everything that's been included as part of the process of developing our plans with our partners. So the data will be in there, all of the qualitative and quantitative data, and ultimately what we'll have is a pack of information that will then provide that front-facing element to the public. Next one, please. So last one for me, just as before I bring Matthew in, was really just to set out, I suppose, the practical arrangements across the 6 areas. So our area teams have community planning officers integral to that, and they are leading on the engagement with communities and partners. So that fact-finding arrangement in private to provide clarification on the what, why, where, how, when elements of understanding everything that relates to developing a place plan. So our place networks, so that opportunity that I mentioned earlier, bringing our partners together to facilitate the collaboration and making sure that there is all the voices coming in to understand each place. So that key collaboration, that data-informed perspective, the qualitative piece that Matthew will speak about, making sure that there is that tangible links to other policy drivers, and also as a council going to be rolled out in June, so good timing again, will be our introduction to our community wealth building policy, and also the charter that we're inviting the offshore sector in particularly to sign up to, and that will be a key element of how we work towards developing our place plans and the delivery of them, with financial mechanisms coming into play there as well. So as you can see, there has been a lot of work done since the place strategy was approved in June last year. We're still on that journey for sure, with a lot of work still to be considered, most crucially around the delivery of the plans. Because once we've created that plan, there will be a balance, and indeed reflecting communities' expectations of these plans, and how the council and partners can deliver them with reducing or at least tight resources available to us. But nevertheless, the ambition is absolutely there, the commitment is absolutely there, and for Aberdeenshire, the whole place-based approach is fundamental to the way we will work in the future. So Matthew, I think I'll just hand over to you now just to explain that community-based work you've done.
Super, thank you, Angela. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matthew. I'm the Community Link Lead at Aberdeenshire Council. Previously working in Fraserburgh as part of the Shaping Places programme, currently working alongside the Learning Estates team at Aberdeenshire Council. So I've been given a couple of minutes today to talk about how I'm applying the Shaping Places for Wellbeing approach, which was originally rolled out for use in 7 of Scotland's large towns, to something very different: school estate change across a variety of locations in rural Aberdeenshire. Now, just to give you some context, Aberdeenshire is massive. The council covers over 2,500 square miles, making it one of the largest local authorities by land area in Scotland. Within that area, as Angela has said, there are 6 area teams. There's 147 schools and a huge diversity of places, communities, and needs. So what does this mean in practice? Well, it means that when we're looking at school mergers, closures, or changes to how buildings are used, we're not just dealing with infrastructure. We're dealing with people's sense of identity, history and belonging, and any issues and inequalities in that place. For many communities, a school is more than just a building, it's the heart of the place. So my role in all this is to support the Learning Estates team by embedding community voice into a process that can often feel technical, bureaucratic and emotionally difficult. Since starting this work, I've been involved in the merger of 2 schools in Fraserburgh, the closure of Clapp Primary School in Mar, the merger of Fovern and Tipperty schools, and the mothballing of Tully-Nestle School. I've got 3 more school assessments to support between now and the end of summer, and another lined up for early autumn. So it's a busy time, but these are high complex, high stake decisions for the communities in question. So why are Learning Estates using the Shaping Places for Wellbeing approach here? So as Shaping Places was winding up in Fraserburgh, the Learning Estates team approached me with an offer I couldn't and didn't want to refuse, which was to come and work for us, doing what you did in Fraserburgh, but exclusively around our 5-year plan to make sure our learning estate remains viable. They did this because while we were working together in Fraserburgh on the Fraser Schools merger, Learning Estates clearly realised that the Shaping Places approach helps bring together data, community knowledge and lived experience in a structured, meaningful way. They recognised that place and wellbeing assessments are a tool that encourages multi-stakeholder dialogue. It gives space for council officers, community members, third sector organisations and others to have honest, evidence-based conversations about what change means and what is possible. But crucially, it's not about saying, let's give everyone what they want. because sometimes we genuinely can't deliver on what the community would prefer, whether it's the funding, national policy, or just practical constraints. But that doesn't mean that we can't listen, reflect, and respond with care. So, what makes the biggest difference, and this is where I come in, is the way we communicate. So, in my role, I gather intelligence on where a community is at emotionally. I look at what kinds of impacts people anticipate or are already feeling. I help decision makers hear that clearly, and just as importantly, using the approach allows me to help communities hear, we've heard you. Even if we can't change this, let's talk about what we can change. So that might mean thinking about future community use of buildings or transport links, or how we keep social connections alive when, if indeed, a school closes. And this work has often revealed that it's not just about the decisions themselves, but how that decision is made and how people are treated along the way. Many communities I work with are small, close-knit, they're deeply connected to their local school buildings. These decisions can feel like an attack on identity, especially when they're drawn out. They're subject to multiple layers of governance and can be quite difficult to explain clearly. For many communities, it can feel like they're being stuck in limbo and not knowing what's next. So that's why part of my role is actually just to show up, to host drop-ins, to attend community meetings, to have informal chats in village halls or cafes, and to build trust by being a consistent human presence. This allows me to hear the key issues in a place, use my knowledge of the outcomes to frame it and understand who the key players are who need to be around it, and all the while already thinking about the assessment that potentially is going to happen in the future, identify who the stakeholders are, but crucially, who are the solutioneers for the issues in that place. So the Shape and Place approach helps shift the dynamic from change being something that's done to a community to something that's done with them. And that might sound like a small difference, but in reality, it changes everything. Because when people feel informed, heard, and respected, even the hardest decisions become a little more manageable, and communities are more likely to stay involved and stay resilient, and even start imagining their future beyond a school closure or merger. I also stay involved corporately with Aberdeenshire Council in trying to help others, officers, elected members, local community planning groups, understand the approach in a context that they can understand, so that we can all put well-being at the heart of everyday business, and not just a tick box afterthought. I ask decision makers to think about what they've done today, this week or month, or even lately, to improve health and well-being in their communities, given the power they have, whether they realise it or not, over people's lives. And it's the kind of work I'm proud to be a part of. So I'm very thankful to be doing this role. So thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Angela, Laura and Matthew, for really bringing to life what's happened, not just with the Shape and Places work, but how it went beyond Fraserburgh and into Aberdeenshire, and how it's being taken across a whole council. And that culture of there not being, one place for a place-based approach. It requires everybody to be part of that place-based approach. And we'll watch with interest as that moves forward as well, and as you develop that. Now, what I'm going to do is pass over to our second example for the day, where we have Andy Whittet joining us, who was the project lead for Rutherglen within the Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme, and is now a project lead for us, continues on, and has been working with Clyde Gateway as well. So Andy's going to talk to us about how they have been developing the Shaping Places for Wellbeing approach, into applying it to place-based approaches to tackling child poverty in the Carlton ward in Glasgow. So Andy, if I can pass over to you to share your screen, and on you go. I'd be delighted to hear what you've been doing since working in Rutherglen and expanding that work.
Thanks, Irene. Thank you very much. Yes, Irene said I was the project lead in Rutherglen for a good while, and the last year or so I've been working with the Carlton ward on our demonstration of change, on looking at child poverty and how they kind of can embed some of the learning from the Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme. So broadly speaking, that is really about how a collaborative, data-driven approach is being used to tackle child poverty across Glasgow, but with particular focus in Carlton through Clyde Gateway. So Irene touched on these key elements at the start. But hopefully, as I'm speaking, you'll be able to see where these key elements of a place-based approach fit in with what we've been trying to achieve, looking at some of the data and stuff, understanding around the place and wellbeing outcomes and how they align best to the work that we're doing, and then considering the impact that of the decisions we're making on trying to tackle child poverty is having on those aspects as well. So, for people that are unaware of Clyde Gateway Urban Regeneration Company works in the East End of Glasgow, but also straddles parts of South Lanarkshire into Rutherglen, and that's where the relationship, the kind of partnership between the Shape Place for Wellbeing programme and Clyde Gateway emerged. They were a crucial part of our steering group on the Shape Place for Wellbeing programme. But they were a natural part of that because of their operation within Rutherglen, and that's cemented the place. And along with partners in planning, health improvement, community planning, NHS, amongst other, and local community groups, they form part of the steering group. So there was always a kind of a relationship that was there. During the course of not just the Rutherglen work, but across the different towns, there was a lot of learning that emerged, as a lot of you will be aware of. And Clyde Gateway were very keen to see that's embedded in the work that they're doing locally. So that started out initially working with their supporting families to access to childcare project, which was based in Rutherglen, Cambuslang, Larkhall and Rigside, all in South Lanarkshire. And the whole kind of purpose about that was trying to embed the role of place-based into their learning document, which, because that project was then moving into the South Lanarkshire Council, and then that paved the way for where we are just now, looking at Clyde Gateway and the Calton Ward demonstration of change, which is what we're focusing on just now. On that demonstration of change, that the work in Calton is basically emerged from the Fairer Futures Partnerships in Glasgow, which overall aim is to reduce child poverty by providing targeted support, fostering collaboration between various agencies, and using data-driven approaches to identify and address the needs of families in that area. So for people that know the Shape and Place for Wellbeing programme, you'll probably see quite a bit of similarity between the approaches being taken there in terms of that data, that understanding of local places. There's 10 wards in Glasgow which are classed as being a booster ward. So that's areas that have been identified as having significant levels of child poverty. And of those 10 wards, 3 are doing just now a demonstration of change, and that's Southside Central, Govan, and where we are in Calton. And that demonstration of change is very much about testing new ways of working to support families, taking a place-based approach, developing an understanding of what the local characteristics are, what the local issues are as well. So it's within that demonstration of change and within the Boost Awards that I think the place-based approach has probably highlighted the best in it, because it's accepting that a universal approach to tackling child poverty probably isn't the way to go. It's not going to cover all the areas. What some of the unique characteristics within the Calton ward may not be prevalent within the likes of Lynn, for example, as well. So it's about trying to be a community-centred, person-centred, family-centred approach within the focus. So most places will be using some kind of community anchor organisation. So within the Calton ward, Clyde Gateway is that community anchor organisation that's leading on the work. And this, you can see here, this is the child poverty map of Glasgow, and you can see that's the dark, I don't know what colour that is, that dark green. The dark shades just to the east of the river is Calton ward, where 35% of children are in poverty. But that doesn't really tell the full story, which is where the place-based approach comes in further. If you kind of zone in into the Calton ward, you'll start to see pockets of poverty where we want to target resources, we want to put our resources into, where child poverty rates up to 50%, so some of the highest in the country. I want to stress this, but this is not, the purpose of showing this isn't to stigmatise an area or anything like that, but to highlight basically how we're using data to identify where we want to put resources. One of the things we're looking at the moment is to do we tests of change. So we need to really focus in about where do we want to do those tests of change going forward. So what we've kind of looking at in that demonstration of change is within the Calton ward, we've identified 4 enablers. The overall aim is to create sustainable employment for people, recognising that we feel that sustainable employment will have an impact of reducing child poverty. To get that sustainable employment, we've identified 4 enablers. I think at one point we're talking about them as being barriers, but we kind of moved away from the barrier approach, kind of more negative connotations around to looking at, well, what do we need to enable these? So, and those 4 enablers are childcare, ESOL, so English for speakers of other languages, community engagement, and employer engagement. So for each of them, what we've done for each of the enablers, we've got an hypothesis, and that what we want to test, what we want to try and address, and we've got a set of assumptions. I'm not going to go through all of them because you'll get the slides and you can have a look yourself, but just to give you an idea. So for childcare, for example, taking that place-based approach, we know that 49% of families in Calton have multi-age children finishing education at different times. So it might be somebody in nursery, somebody in primary school, somebody in high school. And we know that this can perpetuate a cycle of instability and unemployment. That's what the evidence shows us. So we've taken that place-based approach to go, right, well, that's something that we need to address in for childcare in Calton. And our assumptions are around the lines of non-statutory informal community-based childcare could help bridge that gap and provide an opportunity for people to get into employment or training as well. So as I said, for each of the enablers, we've got a set of hypotheses, easy for me to say, and a set of assumptions as well. I'll let you have a look and stuff. If anyone's got any thoughts on it, when you have a look, then please get in touch. And that's the last one, employer engagement as well. Involving employers in creative, flexible family environments as well. So that's the approach we're taking. And our demonstration of change looks a bit like this. And I'm not expecting you to be able to read it, let alone understand it, but it's just to kind of draw your attention to the bit in the middle. So the stuff the difference that we want to make through these enablers. So that's very much focused on the local aspect of the Calton ward. We've got the short term, medium term, long term, and then the kind of impact. You'll see there's like notes in there that we want to put in the statistics that we're working to and things like that. But what I want to kind of draw your attention to is on the right hand side, with the contribution towards place and wellbeing outcomes. And that's where I'm doing a lot of work just now, is looking at that. It's the so what aspect, that where do we go from creating sustainable employment? What's the knock-on impact locally of that on place and wellbeing outcomes, as an example? And one of the kind of main things we're doing throughout is basically is data, as Angela and Lauren and people touched on, is the importance of data in all we're doing. And we took a similar approach to the Shaping Place for Wellbeing one, where we in Rowland, where we got a data profile. So Public Health Scotland worked in partnership with them to provide the kind of raw data, and we put it into a data profile which was hopefully accessible for people. And then that's where we started to draw out some of the key inequalities for the Calton ward, which would support the demonstration of change. So they're all there. I won't go through them all. The couple to kind of draw your attention to the probably more important ones. So children living in poverty, you see there the statistics that we're working to, where we want to be really making a difference in the lives of young people. But below that, English language skills. So that backs up what we were thinking around about providing ESOL classes, because we know that 6 out of 7 intermediate zones in the Calton ward have a population with limited or no English skills higher than the Glasgow average. So that in itself is kind of data that backs up what we're wanting to try and achieve as well. But what we're not doing is similar to what Matthew was saying. We've got to focus as well on what we're hearing locally, that kind of qualitative stuff, because we can't really just rely on the statistics, the data, as good as they are, as important as they are. We need to also know what's important to people locally. And some of the things we're hearing are around the role of carers. So young people missing out on social and learning opportunities due to caring responsibilities. That's like, people went into quite a lot of details around that, and it's a really interesting thing to kind of think about. And then young people mental health. So levels of anxiety in young people, including teenagers, is of great concern for a lot of people. One of the people we're speaking to was talking about saying they feel it's at an all-time high. So how do we address that in relation to our demonstration of change? Where does that feed into what we want to do? We don't want just to have an impact on the data, on the statistical data. We want to be having an impact on what people are saying locally as well. And then a couple down the bottom, English language skills. And we've got a strong history of community-led development and action within the Calton ward. So we need to embrace that. We need to work with that as well going forward. And then this You'll see I'm no artist, but this it hopefully tries to show what we're trying to achieve. So we've got the I guess it's what's the point in gathering that data. So we've got our enablers that we've identified locally in childcare, ESOL, community engagement, employer engagement, and we know what our intended impact is. Our intended impact is tackling child poverty through developing sustainable employment, but not just stopping there. We want to kind of move on and look at, well, what is the additional impact of that on community and society, the impact on the data, the impact on place and wellbeing outcomes. For example, what we want to know is what's the wider impact on the community and society. So where are things improving, both locally and nationally as well? We've got one of the colleagues at Glasgow City Council is looking at the wider cost benefit analysis on what we're doing. So where do we save money in the public purse by these changing things locally? Where does that have a knock-on effect on, for example, mental health services or employment services? Glad he's looking at that. That's beyond my capability of understanding, but it's a really helpful bit of work that we're doing. And then we're looking locally about what the impact is on the data. So we're developing a range of kind of metrics about what data we want to measure success against. So, for example, it might be underemployment locally, what the number of people securing jobs following an intervention, or with childcare, that might be the amount of hours that we're providing childcare and what people are doing with that as well. Or ESOL could be like looking at literacy levels. So there's a range of metrics that are being developed to look at how we measure that against. And then the place and wellbeing outcomes, which is where I've been doing quite a wee bit around, and that's more looking at where we're contributing towards place and wellbeing outcomes as a project and where we can make a biggest difference. I know people in the call, a lot of you probably be familiar with the place and wellbeing outcomes, but just kind of it's basically about enabling the wellbeing of people, reducing inequalities in our communities, and also building towards that net zero mission sustainability. So looking at those 13 outcomes, and I've been trying to align the 13 outcomes with the work we're doing, but also looking at the evidence behind the place and wellbeing outcomes and how that shapes our thinking. For example, if we take the working economy outcome, we know that working economy can have a positive impact on people. All the essential goods and services produced locally, good quality paid non-paid work. That's a very easy one to align to the work we're doing in terms of the tackling child poverty through sustainable employment. But what we're trying to do is look at the other ones as well. So these are just a couple of examples. So under resources, we can start to look at what the economic benefits are of accessible childcare, allowing parents to work, contributing to the local economy. Again, that's probably quite an easy one to align. But then we start digging deeper and think, well, the community engagement side of enabler that we're doing allows for people to identify what services and support are required, but what would make a difference. So a whole family approach, so not just saying, well, we're creating sustainable employment, everything's going to be fine. Is that what other issues are going on locally that we need to provide support for? And then under the civic, a lot is focused around about that identity and belonging approach. So we know that childcare services can foster community connections. So it's not just allowing the parent to go out and seek employment, but it's the social connections that leads to. And that's before we even start thinking about what's the impact on the young person or the child going through that childcare, the resilience built in that, and the connections that's made. What's the long-term impact that's going to have on the young person? And then under language, we've got providing ESOL classes. It's a crucial aspect to developing a sense of identity and belonging in a local community, and letting people also feel safe around that as well. So that's a lot of work that we're trying to do, trying to embed place and wellbeing outcomes into what we're doing. And we're trying not to make it a tenuous link. We're trying to make it a genuine. This is why these things are important, and why we think we need to kind of take that place-based approach. And yeah, just to kind of finish up, there's some ongoing kind of considerations that it'd be great to kind of chat to anybody. If anyone's got any thoughts on any of these, it'd be brilliant to kind of hear from you. A couple of things that we're doing, but we're continue kind of engaging with Public Health Scotland around the burden of disease and links to child poverty and sustainable employment, and around that, and how we can be better. How can we increase our understanding around the burden of disease and what the impact that's going to have locally? Looking at how the data profile has been used outside the Clyde Gateway as well. So we're trying to kind of gather information around that, because who else is using it to take place-based approaches within the Carlton board and beyond. We know that local community groups have been using it for funding applications, which is great. We also know that Glasgow Community Planning Partnership, their performance management framework task force, that was easy, are interested in using it to help demonstrate public service reform for people in place as well, which is great to hear. We're also trying to continue to gather that qualitative data. How we continue to do this while sharing the qualitative data infographic, which I can send out to people. We want to make sure the qualitative data continues to feed into what we're doing and we don't lose sight of that. Marmot is playing a big part in what we're just now because, as I mentioned, Clyde Gateway stretches into South Lanarkshire being a Marmot place. So we're trying to look at the Marmot principles and how they align to the work we're doing, the 4 enablers in particular. We're rolling out the work from Carlton into potentially rolling it out into other areas, including Govan, Shettleston, Drumchapel, having conversations at the moment about how we take that shaping places for wellbeing approach into these areas, which is really encouraging, really good as well. And then there's ongoing conversation about digital mapping of data profiles, except not everyone is a geek like me. So we need to try and find ways of making sure data is accessible to people and is something that people can build on and supporting them to kind of take that place-based approach as well. So that's kind of it for me and stuff. But as I say, it'd be great if, particularly these points here, if anyone's got any thoughts, it'd be good to kind of chat to you at some point in the future if that's good. Okay, thank you.
Lovely, Andy. Thank you so much. That's us with 1 minute to go. So I am going to close. Thank everybody for your time and wish you all a lovely rest of your Thursday. Thank you.